Hello everyone, so a few weeks ago at the Beds and Hearts Home Brewers meeting that I went to, we were set a Will It Brew challenge. So everyone brought in an ingredient that they thought would be able to make a beer with, but that wasn't a standard brewing ingredient as such. And we all drew lots to see who would get what, and I got bread. So yeah, this video is all about making some beer from bread, or I guess reversing that term that, you know, beer is liquid bread or something. I don't know. Anyway. So yeah, I was allotted bread as the secret ingredient for my Will It Brew challenge, and I was actually quite pleased with that, because the bread that was given to me also came with a recipe from a company called Toastale Brewery, and their whole thing is that they brew beer with leftover bread. So unused or unwanted bread is used in their beer, and they provide a homebrew recipe on their website. So I had the recipe, an ingredient that is actually relatively easy to brew with, and I avoided all the other unsavoury items that some people are going to have to try and make beer with. So I think somebody got celeriac, and there was I myself put a sweet potato into the drawer for some poor soul to attempt to make a beer with. There was a few other random things, chestnuts, although that could be quite interesting actually. I think a chestnut beer might be quite tasty if it's done well. But yeah, out of all of them, I think I probably got one of the easier options. Oh yeah, somebody got a cucumber as well. So yeah, lots of random stuff, but mine came with an existing recipe that's proven, and I'd actually been thinking about giving it a go anyway prior to the ingredient challenge, because at BrewCon last year I actually met some of the guys from Toast Brewery, because they were there with a stand handing out samples, and also their homebrew recipe at the time, and had a little chat with them, tried some of the beers, thought the beers were pretty decent, and yeah, I just fancied giving it a go anyway. So yeah, I was quite lucky to get it in the drawers. It was something that I wanted to do anyway, and like I said, avoided all those other strange mystery items. Anyway, so Toast Brewery, like I said, we're at the event, and I've looked into what they do a little bit more since then, and it's actually a really interesting company, because obviously their whole kind of philosophy is to you know, reduce food waste by brewing with bread that would otherwise be thrown away. So they source all this bread that makes up you know, a significant proportion of the grist in their beers, enough to, I guess, offset some of the costs of buying the malt in bulk, and they also donate all of their profits to charity. So it's a nice little you know, kind of ethical brewery business that they've got going on there, and the beer's not half bad either. So when I was talking to the guys at BrewCon, they actually said that the bread itself doesn't really contribute that much in the way of flavour, so it's more just you know, simple fermentable sugars that you get from it. So although, you know, the beers are named Toast, they don't necessarily actually taste that much of bread. So unless you use something with a very strong flavour, so kind of dark bread or rye breads or something like that, you're unlikely to actually notice a flavour impact from it. So I guess it's more like adding simple adjuncts like you know, rice or flaked maize or something like that. Anyway, so the challenge was set. I did get given a loaf on the night, but I basically just ended up eating that because I thought I'd rather actually collect bread that I was going to throw away myself. So I started just saving the ends of loaves of bread that I was, you know, when you get to the end, you obviously a lot of people just throw away the ends of the loaf, or if it's got a bit stale, as I do myself. So I started throwing those into bags in the freezer, saved up about a loaf's worth of scrap bread, and then realised that I needed to actually get the brew done fairly soon, because the meeting where we're supposed to share the product of this challenge is in a couple of months. So I went to the supermarket to top up what I'd already collected and just grabbed a few loaves of out-of-date bread, or soon-to-go out-of-date bread, and yeah, added that to the stuff that I already had. So the recipe, I did scale down slightly to 19 litres. I've made a few other changes to the recipe as well, which I'll go over in a minute. But I scaled it down, but it still needs 1.2 kilos of dried bread. Now, that doesn't sound like that much when a loaf is 800 grams on its own, but once it's gone through the drying process, which they explain in the recipe, you lose about 40% or 40-50% of the weight. So yeah, to get to 1.2 kilos I needed about 3 loaves of bread, which all had to go into the oven, get dried off and so on. So and then crushed up. So it was about a carrier bag's worth of dry bread that went in there, and yeah, that was quite a bit of work doing that, to be honest, but it was an interesting process to go through anyways. So as I said, the recipe is available on their website. I will put a link to that down in the description. The original recipe I did alter a little bit. I'll go through mine shortly, but their version is for 23 litres, 3.5 kilos of pale malt, 1.5 kilos of dried crumbed bread, caramel, 150 grams of that, 150 grams of Munich malt, and then oat husks or rice hulls to aid the mash, because the bread obviously becomes quite sticky and puffs up in the mash. So hopping wise, they have some German Hallertau as bittering addition. They do a 90-minute boil from the looks of the recipe. Cascade and Centennial at 5 minutes, more Cascade and Centennial at flame out with some Bramlin Cross added as well, and then a dry hop of Cascade and Bramlin Cross. So my recipe, I changed it around a little bit because I do tend to fiddle about with these sorts of recipes for clone beers and so on, and also because I didn't quite have all of the things on there. So first of all, scaled it down to 19 litres, so my grain bill became 2.2 kilos of pale ale malt, Maris Otter I used, 1.2 kilos of the dried bread. For the Munich malt, I didn't really see the point, to be honest, of having 120 grams of Munich in there because it's such a small quantity. I can't really see how that's going to have a particular impact on the flavour, so I increased the amount of Munich malt to a much more significant level in the grist, 0.6 kilos, 600 grams, so that takes up to 13% of the grain bill. I do like pale ales where you put about 10-15% of Munich malt in there just to bring up a little bit of colour and kind of body in the beer as well. And then the caramel, I left that as it was, so 120 grams of that, which is 2.6%, so just a dash of the caramel. For the hops, I used some Magnum for bittering at 60 minutes, and I put in the Cascade and Centennial as per the original recipe. For my scaled down version, it was 12 grams of each at 5 minutes, then 20 grams of Cascade at Whirlpool. Instead of Bramlin Cross, I decided to put some Sapphire with it. I've used Sapphire with Cascade before, and I think it makes a really nice combo. It's obviously not really a substitute for Bramlin Cross as such, but it's just what I fancied putting in there instead. 12 grams of Centennial. I think I put a little bit less of that in because I didn't have very much left, so that was just the ends of a bag. And then for the dry hop, I'm going to be using 45 grams of Cascade and 20 grams of Sapphire, fermented with US-05, the old reliable. So other than that, using RO water as per usual with pale ales and so on, and I treated that with some gypsum, calcium chloride and Epsom salt and table salt to give a water profile, which was the light and hoppy water profile from Beersmith, which works out about 75 ppm calcium, 10 ppm sodium, 50 of chloride, 5 of magnesium and 150 of sulfate. So yeah, the usual kind of sulfate, high sulfate kind of thing for pale ales or IPAs, but just slightly toned down from some of the profiles that they have on there. So that was it. I didn't get a huge amount of brew footage for this one because it was a bit of a hectic brew day. I was doing it on Mothering Sunday today, basically, so I had to try and fit it into a window of opportunity when the wife was actually out, and that window started to close quite rapidly towards the end. So yeah, I didn't get that much, but I'll talk you through a little bit of the footage because there's not really enough of it to do the usual musical video montage that I would normally have. Anyway, let's go to brew footage. So this was the bread going into the oven. It was put in there for about an hour at just under 100 degrees, I think 90 degrees they suggest. So yeah, a few bits there that were stacked up didn't dry out that well, but I just put them back in for a little bit longer. And yeah, there's a fuck ton of toast. So that was all the stuff that went in. And here you can see me wielding the pestle with absolute precision. It takes a lot of skill, this part of the process, but yeah, a few tips there for you how to use it. And this looks like I'm off to feed a huge flock of ducks, but no, that was actually all the toast that was going into the beer. So then we had some water treatment, so that was the water salts going in, and I added to the mash water or liquor the oat husks before I put in the grains themselves. So I just poured in the grains on top of the oat husk. These actually really did help the mash. It was I didn't have any problems with it sticking at all. Also, using a brew bag helps a lot with that, even with all that bread on top of it. So this looked initially like it was going to be a total disaster, to be honest, because I didn't think it was going to, blend in. But as you can see, once it started to absorb the wort and get soaked into the mash, it was okay. The initial mash temp there was a little bit under, so I did end up topping up with a little bit of boiling water just to bring it up to 67. And this was the first runnings. I was actually really pleasantly surprised by how clear the first runnings were. So it was really nice clear wort. I think the bread and the oat husk seemed to contribute to that in some way. So this was first hop addition, and a nice vigorous boil there. So who doesn't like to see a nice vigorously boiling pot of beer wort? Yeah, I kind of missed out all the other footage in between. So here's the final gravity. I was a little bit over, but the volume was slightly under, so I think I just boiled it down a little bit too much. And the US-05 about to go in. The wort there was already clearing down quite nicely, and all tucked away in the brew fridge. So yeah, it all went relatively smoothly, and that will be in there for a couple of weeks at 20 degrees. So this was about a day into the fermentation. You can see you've got some really vigorous yeast action going on there. And then after it was fermented out, pretty much the dry hops there ready to go in. So that's more of the Cascade and Sapphire. It finished out in the end around 10-14, which was a little higher than I expected, but it came out still at the same target ABV in the end. And here we have it going into the keg. And a little guest appearance from my assistant brewer there, Thomas, helping me out by providing me with a pipe bender, which was really useful at the time. And then this is it, a little bit later, obviously going into the glass, ready for a quick taste and evaluation. Right, so there we have the finished product. Looks quite nice in the glass, I must say. So it's it's been in the keg for about 2 weeks now. It's clearing down quite nicely. Not totally crystal clear yet, but it's getting there. So a little bit more time. That might be a slight hint of chill haze as well, because it's the keezer is set quite cold at the moment. So I'm trying to lager a few other things in there. Yeah, so nice colour to it. Very sort of light golden sort of straw colour. Yeah, it looks like a kind of golden ale, and a really nice fluffy head on the top there as well. So the head retention seems really good on this. I don't know whether that's got anything to do with the bread being in there or not, but yeah, certainly seems to hold a nice fluffy cap on the top quite well. Yeah, so it looks good. And more importantly, how does it smell and taste? So on the aroma, there is quite a bit of kind of sweet melony type aroma there. So there's a little bit of malt sweetness, Not a huge amount off the hops, but there is this kind of floral, yeah, sort of sweet melon, kind of honeydew melon type aroma coming off of there. There's quite a thick cap on the top, so that may be suppressing a little bit of the aroma coming out of it. So yeah, flavour wise, similar sort of thing really. I'm definitely getting a kind of melony taste off of it, so quite a sweet, as I said, kind of honeydew melon type flavour there. There's some stone fruit in that too, so it's got a bit of an apricot or maybe peachy type thing going on there. A little bit of citrus, but not that much, not as much as I would expect for something that's got quite a bit of Cascade and Centennial in it. So normally with those hops you tend to get quite a bright sort of zingy grapefruit flavour coming through in the beer, but this the combination of the Sapphire with both seems to have really kind of softened that flavour a bit and given it more of a, as I said, that kind of soft stone fruit and kind of melon character to it, which is quite nice. Not necessarily the flavour profile that I was expecting, but it does make for a really nice light sort of summery beer. So body wise it's quite light, so I think the bread, as I said earlier in the video, does act just like a simple sugar in the fermentation and probably gives you a little bit of a lighter body on it. It came out at 4.8%, so it's not you know, it's not the weakest of beers, but it tastes fairly yeah, tastes fairly light for that sort of strength. Nice grain sweetness to it. There's not a sort of toast or bready flavour as such coming from it, other than the normal sort of breadiness that you might get from you know, the Maris Otter and the other grains. So yeah, as I said earlier, I don't think the bread necessarily actually gives any specific flavour to it other than just acting as a fermentable, but it's worked quite well, so I'm really pleased with that beer. It's a nice drink. I have actually had quite a bit of it already, to be honest, so it's been going down well, but in terms of the process, it's not likely to be something that I'll be doing regularly, to be honest, because it's a bit of a faff getting all the bread and processing and things like that, but it was an interesting experiment to go through. It produced a nice beer at the end of it, so I mean, I guess if you do have access to lots of bread that's going to go to waste otherwise, or maybe you've got a bakery nearby that chucks out lots of bread that isn't sold or something like that, getting hold of some and using it to top up a mash can give you some quite nice results, and obviously help prevent a little bit of food waste, which, at a homebrew scale it's not going to really solve any major problems, but fair play to Toastale for doing what they're doing to try and address that. And what better thing to produce with excess bread or waste bread than a nice beer like this. So yeah, cheers everyone, and happy brewing.
I'm the dude, so that's what you call me, that or his dudeness or duder or El Duderino.